Policy, politics, and the pandemic are on the agenda as Chinese leaders get set to chart the way forward. Hi everyone, I'm Sean Caleb sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Chinese government officials will meet later this month at this year's Central Economic Work Conference to discuss the country's economic performance. These discussions are expected to center around China's recovery from the pandemic and economic goals in its latest five-year plan. Forecasters are predicting a growth rate of more than 8% next year, driven by consumption, manufacturing, investment, and exports. However, questions remain about the impact of the global pandemic and the approach the U.S. President-elect Joe Biden will take toward Beijing amid the ongoing tensions between the two nations. There is a lot to discuss, so let's get straight to our panel. William Lee is a chief economist with Milken Institute here in Washington, D.C. Liang is an economics professor at Willamette University in Portland, Oregon. Einar Tangen is in Beijing. He's a political and economic affairs commentator. Also in Beijing, we are joined by John Gong. He is an economics professor at the University of International Business and Economics. Thank you all of you for taking time to chat with us. John, absolutely. William Lee, I'd like to just pick up a bit on what she was just talking about, because a global survey by the U.S. television network CNBC shows that China's economic growth out of the pandemic is leading the world. And I think that a lot of people certainly are praising China for the way it has moved forward out of this pandemic and kept its economy really driving the global economy, if you will. How do you see the Chinese economy shaping up next year in, hopefully, a post-pandemic world?
Well, at the core of China's new five-year plan is this dual circulation strategy, and it's going to be facing essentially two challenges. One, internal, is to boost domestic demand and to really do a delicate shift from public consumption to private consumption, because China really wants to bolster household consumption, which fell by about 5 percentage points of GDP and is back to where it was 5 years ago. And the challenge now is to boost the private consumption and at the same time roll back public consumption to contain the growth of the deficit and debt burden. On the other circulation, the external circulation side, China is going to have to show the world that because it is already ahead of everyone else, it is also going to act as a locomotive for the rest of the world. And in doing so, it needs to import more of the products of the rest of the world. And opening up trade with the rest of the world is going to be a key challenge, and that'll be something they're going to have to deal with the U.S. New administration, as well as the Europeans and all the other governments of the world, to be able to ensure everyone that China's involvement in regional alliances does not cut it out from a global perspective.
William, let's talk about the world's two largest economies and how important it is for these two economies to work together. As expected, we know that President-elect Joe Biden just a short while ago announced that he is going to nominate Katherine Tai to be the next U.S. trade representative. She is someone who speaks Mandarin fluently. She has an amazing working knowledge of China, its economy. And one quote that jumped out at me, and I want to read this to get this correctly, she is expected to treat China with an iron fist wearing a velvet glove. What do you make of this, firstly? And she is expected to be tough on China.
Well, it's a reminder that the Democrats have always been very tough on China in terms of demanding high quality work standards and human rights as part of the trade negotiation package. So the challenge really is for these two largest economies of the world to really redefine the trade framework for the 21st century, to not only worry about the trade in goods and services, but the key is to have the high value added services created a framework where intellectual property is protected and markets, domestic markets, are opened up to the other countries of the world. And that framework was something that I think the U.S. and the Trump administration was trying to engage with China to develop on a bilateral basis. And I think with some success, but I think the key challenges would be those intellectual property and market access clauses that are supposed to be part of the phase two, which now are going to be challenges for the new Biden administration as well as the Xi administration.
You know, and William, let's talk about trying to pump the brakes on all the tension really that has developed between the United States and China moving forward. The Trump administration really concerned about security and technology and barring American firms from investing in companies that the U.S. says are controlled by the Chinese military, cracking down on China's role in telecoms, and adding China's top chip maker, as well as the oil giant CNOOC, to a blacklist of alleged Chinese military companies. Firstly, I want you to listen to what the Chinese Foreign Ministry responded to this blacklist. Hear what they have to say.
China firmly opposes the U.S. suppression of Chinese firms unreasonably, and China has repeated many times China's position. The actions by the United States have violated the principles of market competition and international trade that the U.S. has always been promoting. It will also seriously damage U.S. interests and image. Chinese firms have always been operating according to local laws and regulations. The U.S. should stop abusing the concept of national security and stop suppressing foreign companies.
William, your thoughts on that?
Well, Sean, as I said earlier, the greatest challenge facing China now is to reconcile the dual circulation strategy of developing its domestic standards, domestic demand, and developing its core industries to be at the frontier of, say, chip making and 5G and all of the internet type technologies. At the same time, it needs to be part of the world. And I think one of the things that we should keep in mind is that it wasn't just the U.S. that was concerned about the security nature questions, but also it was a multilateral concern. Australia, UK, Germany, a lot of countries expressed this concern about a monopolistic supplier of material to power the 5G systems around the world. So I think these are the issues that I think will be discussed with a Biden administration with an eye toward a multilateral global agreement whereby we can ensure mutual security and transparency, and at the same time be able to allow each country to develop the tools and instruments to which it has a comparative advantage. And I think one of the things that U.S. has always been good at has been financial services and entertainment services. I mean, look at all the movies that we've produced, and that we need a market around the world, including in China. And at the same time, China will have to ensure that its instruments that it exports to the rest of the world will satisfy the security concerns of UK, Australia, and so on in Germany. So I think one of the things that we need to look at forward is a framework where the 21st century trade in goods and services can be developed in a way that is transparent and gives enough accountability for each side to be satisfied.
Einar, William, we're almost out of time, less than 30 seconds. There's an indication that Pete Buttigieg, former presidential candidate, could be the next U.S. ambassador to China. What do you think of that?
I'm a little embarrassed that relative to our previous ambassadors, who was so experienced and almost a friend of Xi Jinping, we get a newcomer to the scene. And his challenge is going to be to realize that China is part of the Pacific region, and there are challenges to China within the Pacific region. I mean, look at the last trade pact with ASEAN, where China and India's tensions caused India to drop out of that pact. So Buttigieg is going to have a lot of Chinese politics within the region to deal with, as well as to ensure that relations with the U.S. are going to go smoothly.
He is going to have to learn quickly. William, thank you, and thank you to all our guests. That does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Calebs here in Washington, D.C. Thanks, everyone, for joining us.